Hello and welcome to the Bonsai Garden. Juniper are one of those evergreen, ever popular species for bonsai, and I think part of the reason for that is that the thick, dense, small foliage from a distance makes them look like mature trees and helps with that impression of a tree in miniature. I've got several examples around the bonsai garden, so keep watching as I perform regular routine maintenance tasks on those. The first thing that should be noted about juniper is that there are several species and not all of those are made equal when it comes to bonsai. They come in both a needle and a scale foliage variety. I think once you understand that these are effectively the leaves, then in all other respects you can treat them very similar to the way that you would a deciduous tree. The more popular ones, such as the Chinese juniper, the Itoigawas and the Shimpakus, have a dense scale foliage, as you can see here, whereas some of the common varieties that you find in a garden centre, such as this cross media variety here, are perhaps less suited because the foliage isn't as dense. Also, this particular one is a variegated variety, and that naturally means that this one will be a slow grower because it doesn't have as much chlorophyll in the leaves. That means that it photosynthesizes much more slowly and so will grow much less vigorously, and therefore is perhaps more suited really as a garden shrub rather than as a bonsai. But I'll talk about this one in a little bit more detail later. It's also possible that on the same plant you might get both the scale foliage and also, as you can see here, some juvenile needle foliage. Now that is usually a sign of some stress to the tree, although a small amount of juvenile foliage is not necessarily a cause for concern. Now I've got a number of different trees here which I'm going to be looking at, and I've got also an air layer which looks like it may need separating before we get into the colder months. I've got an example of a cascade here which I unwired last year, but now needs some more wire applying to add shape back to that, so I'll be going through that as well. This lovely little ram's horn juniper tree is very nice, but it has grown quite dense, so I'll be looking to just thin that out a bit and perhaps emphasize the pads and the little clouds of foliage going through that, so I will be trimming out some of that. I've also got some cuttings which I took from this particular tree last year, which I need to just have a look at and see whether I need to move those on into separate pots. So I'll be getting to that shortly, so keep watching and see where I get to with things. So the first tree I'm looking at here is this lovely little ram's horn juniper, and this tree was a birthday present to myself last year on my 50th birthday, and I bought this one from Adam at All Things Bonsai. It was one of those trees I'd seen a couple of times when I'd visited and just couldn't get it out of my head, and determined to treat myself on my birthday. So now I'm a proud owner of it. It does need a little bit of work to separate out foliage and to create some distinct pads in there. And I'm going to do that just by clipping out some of the growth. So in the sort of regular fashion of trimming trees, I'm cutting out anything that's growing directly upwards or directly downwards to start with, because we have got pads here. It's just that with the growth downwards and the growth upwards, we've lost that separation. It's also a tree which has strong apical growth, so it tends to grow heavier on the top than on the bottom, so it helps when you're trimming it to bear that in mind and to trim the top much heavier than you do the branches further down. It's also got a little bit of brown foliage on the interior. So the first thing I'm going to do really is to just work my way around the tree and just really brush that out so you can see what I'm working with. I think it's just natural that some of the older leaves or scales will die off, and also anything that's shaded out on the interior will likely also suffer and die. And as well as the aesthetic reasons for trimming the tree, that's also one of the practical reasons to stop the interior foliage from dying off. Work my way through there and just have a look and see if there's anything dead that needs removing. And now I'm going to go through and just trim out some of the foliage. So looking here, for example, there's dowel growth there. I'm just taking that out. And there are two sort of maintenance tasks to perform on a juniper. One of them is pinching off the growing tips of the branches. So here, for example, and if you think about it in terms of a deciduous tree, if you pinch out the growing tip, what happens is the auxin, the hormone auxin, was in the end of that particular branch, telling it to extend outwards. Whereas if you take that tip out, the auxin is redistributed to the branches immediately behind it, and so they will start growing stronger instead. So that's the reason for taking out some of the growing tips. The other type of maintenance is trimming back branches where there is stronger growth and to reshape the tree. So in this particular instance, you can see it does seem much heavier on this side, and we'll probably need harder trimming there just to bring the shape back. I think, in fact, if I cut that back to there. And it's worth noting that these clippings, depending on what time of year it is, it's worth trying to seed them into a gravel tray or something, because I do have some cuttings that I made from another tree which have grown and rooted, which I'll be looking at a little later in this video. So it's a combination of pinching out the growing tips to encourage back budding further back into the branches, whilst at the same time trimming out anything that is getting in the way of creating an image of paths in the tree. So in here, for example, I've got quite a lot of downward growth there, which is spoiling the effect of separating the branches. The weak branch further back there that I'm not supposed to take out. So there's a little bit more separation there. Remove that. And just continue around the tree like that. So you can see we've got a branch which is extending out here, so pinch that back. And same with a lot of these other branches around it. So here I'm encouraging the branches further back to grow. So it's really a case of going around the tree, practicing a combination of both of those two techniques to either encourage more foliage where I need it, or to remove the foliage where it's already quite dense. And also just cleaning out dead needles.
Now this is part of the tree that's quite dense, so I'm going to take out some more substantial parts. Remembering that because it's an apically dominant tree, the stronger growth is in the apex. And it sounds like my washing cycle has just finished. Either that or the washing machine is trying to telephone me. The tree might also benefit from me adding some wiring into it just to reposition some of these branches to make the foliage pads more obvious. So I could, for example, raise this branch, lower some of these, and it makes the separation clearer. It would also make it easier to see some of these gins on the tree as well. I think to that end I might actually remove all of that just to make those more visible. I'd be interested to hear in the comments if you would have treated this tree any differently. We're still looking quite dense on this top part of the tree, and we don't have that sort of conical shape, so I'm just looking to see what I can do to try and reintroduce that without taking off too much foliage. And you can see here an example of where we've had juvenile foliage develop. And that has then gone on to develop into regular scale foliage. So there's a reason not to be overly concerned if you have a little bit of needle foliage on your tree. will eventually grow out. Some of this downward growth. We've got some upward growth here. Just trim that out. When you're trimming a juniper, never trim back past where there is green growth. So in here, for example, we've got a branch, no green growth on it until here. And then we've got all the green growth. If I was to trim this to there, we're not going to get any back budding on there, because the green foliage is drawing the sap and the hormones along the branch, and if we remove those, then there's nothing pulling that. So that's something to beware of in junipers. So I gave this tree a treatment with lime sulphur in spring, and you can see that's why this looks quite white, and it's beginning to lose some of its colour now. You can see it's going a little bit green in some places. It's not too much of a concern at the moment. I'm probably not going to apply any more lime sulphur until after winter now, which will revive the tree. And at the same time, I'll also take a toothbrush to it and just clean up the bark. So we get a nice contrast between the red bark, live vein, and the shari. So I don't think I'm going to be doing too much more work on here. It's best not to overwork a juniper. Perhaps just take that out. So there's now a clearer separation between the different layers, so I don't think we need to do too much more with that at this stage, apart from perhaps put some wire on it just to separate out some of this growth. This particular tree is my Greenwood lockdown juniper project tree. So I bought it from Greenwood Bonsai during lockdown when Corinne was selling a batch of these trees as lockdown projects, and he had a video on his channel about them. And I don't really need to do an awful lot with this at the moment. See that some of the needles are beginning to brown off on the tips, and I think that's just simply as a result of either the drought we've had or the changes in temperature, because in the UK at the moment it is now getting a little bit cooler, and I'm expecting more of this over winter. I think I'm likely to leave this tree until next year before I do anything more with it. This is a tree which I bought on a visit to Elmbrook Bonsai. It's a fairly small bonsai nursery in the Derbyshire area,
It's actually sited in a little porta cabin within a garden centre complex, and I had a look round and I saw this particular Chinese juniper and bought it. Having got it home, I decided that perhaps it was a bit taller than perhaps was to my particular taste, but I did like the look of the top of the tree. I thought that perhaps there were two trees in here, so I decided to air layer it. So I air layered it last year, and it was very, very slow to put out any roots. In fact, it just calloused and didn't actually put any roots. So round about the end of June of this year, I removed all the moss, and where it had calloused, I recut and re-separated the tree at that point, and then left it to see if it had any more success with it. And I can see now that in the bag I have got lots of fresh roots in there. So I'm proposing to separate this tree at this point. There's perhaps not as many roots as I would like in there, but I think it will be enough to sustain this small tree at the top. And we're sort of at the later stages of the year where it would be safe to separate this, giving it enough time before winter sets in to get established in a pot. I am going to separate this into two trees. Here we go. A bit of a struggle to find where the base of my air layer is. Just take this wrap off. Make the job a little bit easier for myself. I'm just really wanting to uncover the point at which I can separate the two, and it looks like that's the point there. And there we go. So I'm now going to plant that part into a pot, and it's going to be in a gritty soil with lots of perlite in it, just surrounding the moss ball and the roots. And then I won't be doing anything with that until spring of next year, just leaving it to settle in the pot and for the roots to develop. And this is the other part of the tree, which will need some work on it to make it look more attractive. And it might be a case of trimming some more of this, removing some branches, or creating some dead wood on it. At this stage I'm not overly concerned. I'm just mixing up some soil to put this air layer into, and it's made of equal parts of agricultural sand, molar clay, i.e. cat litter, and perlite. Now, I think a lot of people stress and worry a lot about soil composition, and I think provided it provides the main agricultural and horticultural needs of your trees, you don't need to worry too much about it. I think if you look in nature, trees grow across a whole load of different types of soil and strata. Provided the soil is free draining, has some ability to hold some moisture, then I think you're good. I find that perlite is particularly useful for new trees or cuttings and things like that. It helps them to put roots out. It's good for new and young trees and seedlings. In terms of cat litter or molar clay, I think a lot of people get a little bit overexcited about that. It's probably the closest thing we have other than Akadama in the UK, which has very similar properties, to be honest, except that unlike Akadama, it doesn't break down. The key is to find the right stuff, and in the UK, we're talking about something which is a terracotta colour like this, and it tends to be things like kitty friend cat litter from Pets at Home, or the Lurdust non-clumping cat litter from Tesco. The important thing is not to buy something that's a grey colour, that will break down into sludge once it gets wet. This won't. It will absorb some moisture, but it won't break down. It's just making sure that this is well mixed. I know that some people have been using and swearing by cat litter or molar clay for perhaps 20 years or so, including people like Harry Harrington. Although most recently I saw that he has an article on his website where he talks about some possible minor issues concerning the bacteria culture or lack of in the molar clay as opposed to Akadama. It's worth taking a look, but I think there are an awful lot of people who still use cat litter and find it very effective for their trees. Now I quite like the look of this tree in either of these two pots. But I think at the moment that would probably be a bit premature, when what I need to focus on is developing the root ball. So what I propose to do is pop it into this plastic training pot and let it develop perhaps until about this time next year, and then I'll repot it into a more appropriate pot once it's developed a more established root ball. So I've prepared my pot now with some potting mesh and some wires to stabilise the tree in the pot. What's important at this stage is that the tree isn't moving about whilst the roots are developing, otherwise it might damage or shear off the roots. So I'm adding an initial bit of soil in there. I'll place my tree into the pot. Bring my wire around those roots. Just tie that off. And the same on the other side. Just bring that around. And just twist. Just cut off the excess. And then just fill in the pot to cover the roots. See there, what we've got, hopefully, is a lovely little Shohin Chinese Juniper Bonsai tree with some lovely shape in it already. And once that has developed more mature roots, we can then look at trimming those roots to fit it into a more attractive pot. That's the future of this particular tree. So I need to set that aside, just make sure it's regularly watered, just keep an eye on it really. I'm just looking at the parent tree here, and I'm thinking that initially it might be worthwhile bringing this branch at the back just up over the top as a new apex. So I'm just going to wire that into place. So start with anchoring my wire on this branch here. Just being careful not to trap any of the foliage. And just take that round the trunk a couple of times. And up and round.
bring that branch forward as the new leader. And just trim off the excesses. Whilst I'm looking at this tree, I'm thinking as well, it might be as well to wire this branch further forward to fill in this area here. So that's what I'm going to do, piece of wire, and then we're going to anchor it onto this branch over here. And I'm trying not to trap any of the existing foliage as I do this. And it's just really loose coils. I don't need to wrap this too tightly around the branch. I'm just really trying to guide it into place. I'll just trim off the excess. On this side, and then I'm manipulating this branch round into this space here. And I think whilst I'm at it, I can try and add some movement into these branches as well. So I'm filling this space, and I think in time I'll also lower this branch as well. So I think that's all the work on the parent tree for the time being. So from one tree has come two. So I mentioned in the introduction that Chinese juniper can look like larger, more mature trees from a distance. And hopefully some of these images will show you what I mean. I quite often find myself driving past rows of mature trees and thinking that they look an awful lot like juniper. Let me know what you think. If you're looking for a great resource on the care and cultivation of junipers, I can recommend this book highly. It's part of the Bonsai Today Master Series, and I bought my copy from Greenwood Bonsai online. I'll put the link below. The book covers the growing and styling of juniper bonsai of various kinds and covers all sorts of techniques and maintenance tasks, as well as showcasing a number of different trees and the work and styling that was done on those trees. And it's a great resource for anybody who's interested in juniper bonsai. I'd highly recommend it.